We are now 8 races into the 2024 NASCAR Cup Series season, just shy of the quarter mark, and we're starting to see some interesting trends develop. The question is, do those trends translate to betting? I know the one person to answer that question, and that's Greg Matherne of the information-filled website wintherace.info. I visited with the betting expert to discuss what's happened in the first 8 races as far as betting is concerned, including the drivers who've been good and not so good to him, and got his thoughts on this coming weekend's race at Texas. I'd like to welcome back to the channel Greg Matherne of Win the Race. Hey, Greg, thanks for joining me again.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So let's go through the season. We're 8 races in. This weekend at Texas, we'll be at the quarter mark of the season. We'll talk about the trends of the season. I mean, it's clear that the Toyotas and Chevys, and specifically William Byron, have done really well. I'm just curious, from a bettor's perspective, what are the trends that you're seeing in some of the drivers who've been good and maybe some of the drivers who haven't been so good to you to start off the season, the first 8 races in?
Yeah, so 8 races in, we're looking mostly kind of at like, curiosity stats. There's not a whole lot that we can, kind of gather in terms of our long-term profitability on a driver. But it definitely is interesting to see where we're doing, how we've kind of, played out on those guys. You mentioned William Byron. Haven't bet on him recently, but he was really good to me. I had a bet on him to win the Daytona 500. That obviously cashed. So that was, a great start to the season. The other driver who's been really, really good to me has been Michael McDowell. Now, I've only bet on him 3 times, and I haven't bet on him recently. But at Atlanta, he did great stuff for us. He won the pole, he won stage one. We were on both of those bets over at Win the Race. So, those two have been, particularly good to me. One who has not been so much, Brad Keselowski. Brad's killing me. And I keep going back to that. Well, I'm actually heavy on him this week. I'm, a big fan, but every single bet that I've placed on Brad this year has lost. So we're hoping that's going to turn around. We expect that to turn around. At 8 races in, like I said, it's kind of hard to draw any, firm conclusions. It's not a huge sample size. Most of these racers, we're not looking at having made more than, 5 or 6 bets on them at most. So we're looking through that, seeing where we are, and kind of trying to figure out if there are trends to look at. Toyota, obviously, as you mentioned, has been very good this year. They've not been so great to us on the betting side. We are right around even money on Toyota bets, but the team is clearly there. They've got some speed.
So, talking about Brad and just the general sense in all of NASCAR and the industry is about Ford and their struggles. And I know Ryan Blaney is the only one in the top 10 when it comes to playoff points. I think Chris Buescher is 12th and Joey Logano is like 13th. And Brad is somewhere like, I think, 18th. So when you think about where the whole manufacturer is collectively, do you just say, I'm just going to steer clear of them? Or do you go, maybe there's an opportunity here to go with a Ford because they might surprise? I mean, because you've seen Josh Berry had good runs. Even Logano and Keselowski for about 3 weeks ago, I guess, was on a pretty good run. Logano's been on a much better run here lately. So do you just miss them just because they're a Ford and they're not going to do well because they collectively haven't run well? Or do you take a flyer on some of those guys and go, hey, maybe this might be an opportunity?
I think you have to look at it both ways, right? You have to say, we have some doubts about Ford. And so you have to build in some skepticism to looking at them. It is only 8 races, but the flip side is it's 8 races with a whole bunch of drivers, right? It's a much better sample size than 8 races on one driver. 8 races on one driver, you go, you're gonna have a slump that time. 8 races on a field of drivers and they're all having trouble. Man, that tells us something is probably not quite right in that Ford camp, and it is concerning. That said, I think you can look at drivers who have done really well here in the past, who have typical 1.5 speed, and we go, yeah, there's some room for opportunity here. There's also going to be some room in the Ford camp. I haven't yet this week, but we can look at, top Ford markets or group bets or head to heads where we're entirely within the Ford camp, and you might still be able to find some value there. So it's kind of, again, looking at it, but there definitely is some concern there when you look at, Ford having troubles. That said, Brad, I'm big on this week. He's been really good at Texas. He's been really good at the 1.5s. If you look at the Ford camp, and again, this goes to sorting out the Fords separately, as a group, or versus as the individual. If we look at Brad individually at these races, he's been really good. He's been one of the most consistent drivers in the series. Now,
Right.
he's not popping all the way to the top, so maybe we say his upside is capped, but he's been incredibly consistent at these tracks.
Right.
Both years, with RFK, even if we go back to the first year when RFK was really struggling before they kind of sorted it out last year, he's been a kind of a model of consistency at these tracks. And so I think we can say someone like Brad, maybe there is some value, maybe not the total upside, but
Right.
we've got, top 10. That's where I'm, going with him this week. And in a head to head, because there's still some value there that I think is getting underplayed because of the struggles of Ford.
Um, One question before we transition into Texas. Just thinking about it, do you have a particular driver that, let's say you started the season, you said, I'm high, I think I'm going to be betting on this driver. I know it's kind of week to week and everything kind of, it's in flux because things can change as we've just talked about. Brad has had a good season, but he's had some struggles. Joey had some good starts, good on the pole, but just struggled, and now he's kind of found it. So do you find yourself starting the season say, I might be betting on this particular driver or this team, and now we're into the season, you're going, I have been betting on them the most, or I haven't been betting on them?
Two actually come to mind. Eric Jones and Joey Logano both were drivers that I came into the season thinking I'm going to be really high on these guys. I'm going to be betting on them a lot. And Eric Jones in particular, I don't know. Legacy seems like they're not. They're not. It's not that they're not quite where we thought they were. No, I don't think anybody thought that they were going to struggle quite this much. They've not been terrible. It's
Right.
not been the same as it was at the start of last year, but we all kind of expected a big jump from the end of last year to this year with, the move back to TRD, and it's just not necessarily been there. They're all over the place. The races where they're great, the races where they're not so great. I've done well with Eric Jones, actually. I've made a little bit of money on him, but I really thought it was going to be more. And then, obviously Joey, I placed a season long bet on him over 2 wins at the start of or over 1.5 wins. So to win at least 2 at the start of the year. Um, and I don't know that outside of Richmond a couple of weeks ago, I don't know that I've thought he's had race winning speed in any of the races so far, which has been concerning.
Right.
But that goes back to those Ford issues. So, he does seem to be figuring out. So maybe I'm optimistic going forward. But yeah, those two definitely struck me as drivers I was going to be betting on, and I'm kind of reevaluating a little bit.
All right, so moving on to Texas this weekend. Like I said, it'll be the quarter mark point of the season. Just on Win the Race info, and I encourage all my followers to go check it out because they have so much good information on there. Just looking at Texas, and the numbers just stand out with like William Byron, Kyle Larson, Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex. All these guys have, like, Denny Hamlin's 91% top tens in the last 7 races there. Kyle Larson, 84%. Kyle Larson, 69% top 5 finishes there. So the big names, the big hitters we think of always when we go to Texas. So that looks like that's kind of going to be the trend this year. I know Bubba Wallace back in the fall last September set on the pole. He led early on. So kind of give me an assessment of what you expect this weekend in the Lone Star State.
I expect speed to matter and drivers to matter less. We were kind of talking, amongst some of us over at Win the Race, and we said this might be the least driver-centric track on the schedule this year. It's just going to be about who's got speed. It's just, I mean, unfortunately, after the reconfiguration a couple of years ago, the racing has not been great here. The reduced banking in the turns and the widening of it has just meant that everyone's just kind of flooring it going, and there's not been a lot of passing, not been a lot of good racing. So I do kind of expect like the teams that we would expect to bring speed to be our competitors. Joe Gibbs Racing, we expect them to bring speed. That, I'm going to lump the 2311 guys into that camp because I just kind of view them as an extension. The Hendrick guys, I'm going to view them in the same way. If we go looking down to some of the lower teams, Ryan Blaney has been really good on the 1.5s, but some of that's skewed by the fact that he dominated the Coke 600 last year, right? So some of that is skewing his data up, because he's got a lot of the laps led, not a lot of the laps led, a lot of laps in top 10, but the finishes aren't necessarily there. And when I drill down to his incident adjusted speed metric, he's not terrible, but he's over the past 7 1.5 mile races, his incident adjusted speed rank is 10.29. So, it's not terrible. It's good for ninth best in the series, but he's the best Ford there at ninth best. And then right behind him is Brad Keselowski, going back to our, kind of model of consistency. So I really do expect it to kind of be a two-team, three-team, if we count the 2311 guys race, between the Hendrick guys and the Joe Gibbs guys, just who's bringing speed.
So you got Brad this week. Do you expect you'll continue down on the Brad train, or is at some point do you get off and go, I don't know if I can continue to go this route because he's not doing me any favors?
I'm going to have to go a lot further on Brad before I, start reevaluating. Again, I've mentioned it a couple of times. It's an 8 race sample size. I think it's 5 bets on Brad. They've all lost, which sucks and, makes me go, oh man, that stinks. But I don't look back at any of them, with maybe the exception of betting him over Logano at Atlanta, which was kind of like an impulse. Oh, hey, Logano's going to the back. We think he's going to be, maybe a lap down or something and, be in trouble.
Right.
And then, got bailed out by the caution. I don't look at any of them and think, oh, those were bad bets. They were, ended up not cashing. I think, if we got to the end of the season and we'd bet on him 20 or 30 times and we'd lost every one, then we might go, let's take a look at our model, see if there's something that's, favoring Brad too much that has us, over high on him. But not at this point in the season. At this point, I'm still ready to ride with him. I think, again, looking at his history here, he has been the model of consistency. Again, the finishes haven't always been there, but he's running up there, and sooner or later that consistency is going to cash. He's just got to avoid some of the trouble that he's unfortunately had.
All right. Thanks, Greg. I really appreciate your insight in the betting world of NASCAR. As I said a moment ago, I encourage all of my subscribers to go check out wintherace.info. They have just great information. Sign up for it. It's well worth your money spent because it provides you just a lot of data that can help provide you information and educate you, make good decisions when it comes to betting on NASCAR. So I appreciate it very much, Greg, for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kyle.
Thanks, buddy. Take care.